What if I said there are hundreds of camera settings, and after well over a decade of working in the video field, I've seen my fair share of settings. So what if I said there's only about 7 settings that you really need to know about, and the rest of them, yeah, can they just go over there for a long time? Let's dive in. This is a really important one. I'm talking about the focus settings because after all, people who are watching your stuff, they want to see you or whatever you're showing. They want to see it in focus and it shouldn't be blurry. Autofocus for the best part is pretty good in a lot of cameras, especially Sony cameras. However, there are times needed where you are going to have to use something that's called manual focus. Now, depending on the camera that you have and the lens, you might have to dial this in on the lens. Sometimes there's a little button that you can switch on the lens. If you've got something like the Osmo Pocket 3, it could be something completely different buried within the settings, but basically find out where it is. So in this example here, and by the way, all of these settings that I'm talking about are applicable to all cameras. You just have to dig in and find where they are for your camera. Here we can see I've got exact focus settings. I can have continuous autofocus or manual autofocus, right? That's all well and good. But the most important thing when using manual focus is 2 things. Number 1, you have to have something called peaking turned on. Now, what peaking does essentially is it will create a color around exactly what is in focus. In every camera, it's called peaking. So it could be called peaking display. You might have a choice of colors like red, yellow, blue, white. I choose red. So it's just good to know where your autofocus setting is, whether it's on the lens, if it's within the camera, know where that is. And keep in mind as well, when you are using manual focus, as soon as you move, whatever you had in frame or in focus is going to now be out of focus. It mightn't be a lot, but it could be enough for your audience to go, ugh. A lot of cameras these days are using subject recognition using AI. What that means basically is the camera knows exactly what it is shooting. Figure out where your subject recognition is, because if you're shooting something like people, then you want the recognition to be people, not like an animal or a bird or a plane, because the camera will focus on that then and it won't be able to find the person. Regardless of whatever camera you have, you probably have a little microphone built into the camera, or you can use an external mic. Now, there's so many different mics out there. They all have different volume settings. So some might be a little bit too high, some might be too low. And what that means is people can't hear you, or it's too loud and it's distorted. Sometimes auto settings in mics are good, but find in your camera where your audio recording and most importantly, your audio recording level is. Now, this is different for every camera. For me, I'm kind of leaving it around a 10 or a 12, but essentially for a lot of cameras, bring it down and leave the camera's preamps. I know that's a technical term, but leave the camera kind of do a lot of the heavy lifting, because the higher up you put your recording level, that's going to make it hissy and noisy. So bring it down as low as you can and use the volume on the mic or the recording level on the mic if you have it. So just know where that is, right? And the key here is, as long as if you've got little VU meters going up and down on the screen, as long as they're kind of green and maybe yellow, you're pretty good. If they're red constantly, you're in trouble. If you don't have VU meters, it can be trial or error, but you will find that perfect level. But start maybe at 10 or 11 or a 12. When you are recording audio, the thing is, if you're out and about, if you don't have a little wind muff on your camera, it can be a pain in the butt, but it'll block out the wind. Now, the thing is, a lot of cameras will have something called wind noise reduction or wind level or something along those lines. Either turn it on or off, or leave it on auto. It's not going to work wonders, but it might be enough if you just kind of get stuck in a bit of a pickle. One of the most widely used settings in any camera is where you're actually going to format the card. Now, it's best practice to format your SD cards within the camera, because every camera will have its own little file structure with folders and stuff like that. So format it in camera all the time. And the thing is, for the most widely used feature in cameras, it's buried within a lot of the menus. Create a shortcut in your camera if you can for it, but generally it could be somewhere in settings, buried very, very, very deep. I can't even find mine here. Actually, yeah, here it is eventually. So I've got, I don't know how many screens I've got to get to. It's buried in menu, and then we can format. Yeah. Know where your format SD card option is. Every single camera is different, but figure out where it is, because you will be using it a lot. Most cameras these days, whether it's your phone, a GoPro, Osmo Pocket 3, a mirrorless camera, whatever you have, they've all got different frame rates and shooting options when it comes to resolution. This is really important. So if you want some slow motion, you got to figure out where exactly your slow motion options are. Some cameras will have an S&Q mode, which is good. In most cases, they don't record audio, but figure out where it is, and then just be knowing that you gotta go to 60p, for example, or if you want to bring it to 120p. And in this case, the SD card that's in this camera won't do that, but whatever, we'll just ignore that for the video. Prep, Vic, prep. So know where that is. But the other thing as well is when it comes to your resolution, a lot of the times this could be hidden in something called file format. So in most cases, you will have HD, which is 1920 by 1080, or you'll have 4K, which is 3840 by 2160. So I'd always suggest shoot in 4K because you've got extra quality, you're getting the most out of the camera. The downside though is it will use up more hard drive space, it will use up more SD card space, but the thing is, it's important to know where these are. Sometimes you just leave it in that setting and you're good. But what happens if you just need like one last clip of the day? And then you're like, oh, it's not the most important clip, but it's a clip. Just know where the resolution settings are because you can just bump down to HD and that will give you a lot more recording time. So on HD here, in this example, I've 3 hours and 42 minutes. But if I bounce back up to 4K, not that one, I only get 41 minutes, and that's at 120p. So keep that in mind. It's really good to know where these resolution settings are and figure out how to change them on the fly. Majority of cameras will have some kind of shooting modes, including auto, which I will speak about in a minute. But if you want the blurry background, if you want that bokeh, then you really have to be in what's called aperture priority. That's one way of doing it. That's the easiest way of doing it now. You have aperture priority, and essentially you dial in the bokeh, the amount of blur that you want, which in a lot of lenses will go all the way down to 1.8 or 1.6 or 1.4. Basically, the lower the number, the more the bokeh, the more the blur. That's what you got to remember, okay? And every camera, in a lot of cameras, they'll have a little dial to go into aperture priority, and sometimes it can be called shooting mode. So you can see here in this example, shutter priority, aperture priority, and all you got to do is dial in 1.8 and the camera will do the rest. Shutter priority will do the exact opposite. It will prioritize for the shutter speed, so you dial in the actual shutter speed, which is all well and good, but that can make things a little bit jittery. Now, auto mode. Is auto mode any good? Well, before I talk about auto mode, manual mode is if you're feeling really brave, but I would suggest to everybody, please dig into manual mode at some point. But know where these settings are in the camera because you will need to change them a lot. And these are really, really important. Auto mode, in a lot of cases, it's pretty damn good. Some of the biggest videos in the world, none of them have ever used anything but auto mode. A trained eye might be able to see it. Most folks couldn't give a toss. They just care about the story and the entertainment. So know that auto mode can't be good enough for a lot of scenarios, and that's fine. But when it comes to the time for you leveling up, the really important settings to know are where your shutter priority, your aperture priority, your manual, your auto modes, how to get in and out of all of those. They're important. If you're shooting on a sunny day, which where I live is very, very rare, you should know the screen brightness levels. This varies from camera to camera, but every camera that has a screen has a brightness level in the settings. And in this case here, it's way, way down. I mean, you've got to do a lot of digging, but I'm in monitor in this camera, which is the Sony ZV-E1, and then you have monitor brightness. So you have sunny weather or manual. So we can see, we can make it brighter or darker. Now, sunny day, put the brightness all the ways up. The reason being is because it's going to be harder to see the actual camera screen and what you're doing. The other downside of that though is it's going to eat your battery a little bit more, make the camera a little bit warmer. So find the happy balance. But brightness settings are hugely important because you need to see what you're shooting. And if it's a vlog, you really need to see what you're shooting. So brightness settings, hugely important. But if you want to save some juice in the battery, keep them way down. Keeping with the actual camera screen, as you can see here on this camera, I've got a whole lot of stuff going on. Now, in my case, I can swipe some of these off sometimes. But you've got to find out where you can turn all of these on and off, because if you want a better look at what you're shooting, in this case, and in a lot of cameras, you'll have something called a DISP button, which is short for display. In my case, I can push these up and down so I can get a lot of these off. In the Sony example, they do have black bars top and bottom, so you're not completely affected. But again, when you bring all of these things on, I'm not an animal. White balance is one of these things which in auto mode, it works really well. For example, this video has been shot in auto mode on white balance. So I'm like taking a risk. But especially if you're out during the day, white balance colors can change. And basically that means it can go from kind of warm to cool very quickly. You can get weird color casts. Know how to go into manual white balance. Every camera, for the best part, will have some version of auto white balance or some kind of presets, and you got to dig into the settings. Usually you'll find them in the actual camera display settings or the shooting settings. And to be honest, here's a bonus tip. If your camera offers you an option to do shortcuts, do shortcuts. I live and die by my shortcuts. I'm even struggling, just between me and you, I'm struggling right now going, where the heck is the white balance gone again? Oh yeah, there it is. It's in exposure and color. So you can set it to auto, or you can bring it to daylight. Every camera will have some preset, or you can kind of dial it in yourself as well, which is absolutely worth doing. I put a kind of a cheat sheet on the screen, but daylight white balance, if you're out during the day, it's usually 5500 or 5600, and the rest of them, you know, at night it gets a bit cooler and so on. So there's a kind of a couple of basic numbers there you can dial in, but it's a good practice to get. And yeah, but in a lot of cases auto works, but you really want that one really important shot to be screwed up because the white balance went gaga. Now, the older your camera, white balance could even be a little bit more freaked out by different things. So just keep the age of your camera in mind as well.